There's a phenomenon that's been written about a lot called juvenoia. It's a kind of paranoia about the way the next generation is coming up. And we think about this as though it's kind of a new phenomenon, sort of a new idea, but way back in the 1,000 years before Jesus even stepped onto the planet, the writer Plato actually wrote about the next generation was spoiled because they had the advent of paper. They weren't going to have to memorize all these grand epics and stories because they had paper, and it was going to be written down, and it was going to make the next generation lazy and weak. Does that sound familiar at all to anyone? We look at these things and we tell ourselves, well, there's nothing new under the sun, but the reality is that there is new all the time, and the newness is constantly birthing new newness. And the new newness is going to birth new newness and new newness and new newness again and again and again. And all of that is the way God made the world to be. And all of that is part of the ordered plan of the Creator. And yet, the pace of that newness seems to be accelerating. I mean, maybe it's that I'm getting older, but I look at the things that trend on social media. I look at the way my own daughter is experiencing technology, the way that the conversations around TikTok and 6-year-olds is happening on school playgrounds, and I'm floored because I don't understand it. I struggle to keep up with it and to even wrap my mind around what it is, not just how it is. The reality is that a generation that we have given life to, and we have, as the church, said we're going to stand around. We've taken our baptismal vows seriously and said we're going to stand behind this generation, is moving forward at a pace that we can't possibly keep up at. And they're going faster and faster. And I think that part of this stems from the reality that this is a generation that has entirely known only the instantaneous. It's a generation that has only known the instantaneous. Like, I remember being a kid, and if I stayed home from school, I would put on I had Top Gun on Betamax. Some of you will remember Betamax. Some of you, you're like, oh yeah, that was And I could watch it over and over and over. I can still, to this day, recite virtually every line from that movie. That movie is indelibly drilled into my soul. And yet, a generation older than me, the idea that you could have a movie playing in your house was something that was either a luxury or weird or different. I mean, there was a generation who grew up going to the theater and seeing the same movie time after time after time because the idea that you could have it any other way was inconceivable. And now we live in a world where movies show up immediately on my phone. They don't go to the theaters. They don't show up in the theaters. We don't even have to have a home theater system set up or a VHS player or a DVD player or whatever the next thing would have been. We just click a button and there it is. We live in a world of one-day delivery and if that delivery is not fast enough, they will simply show up at your house the very next day and take the thing back again. The idea of instant has infiltrated every part of our life. And we wrestle with this reality and we wonder why an entire generation knows only the speed of anxiety. Some statistics. So in 2020, the American Psychiatric Association found that 19% of all adults living in Canada, in the United States, have some degree of anxiety-related illness. 19%, so 19 out of 100. During the COVID pandemic, for 2 years, year over year, the rate of prescription for anxiety-related disorders rose by 25%. So it means it rose 25% from 21 to 20, and then another 25% from 22 to 21. which means that if you map that onto Canada, and we're not sure that it's entirely a one-to-one mix or one-to-one map, but broadly speaking, let's assume that that's the same thing. That means that before the COVID pandemic, there were 10 million adults in Canada, which means that if there were 10 people in the room, 2 of them were struggling with anxiety. During COVID, a third person in that room. 500,000 new Canadians were diagnosed with some form of anxiety-related illness because the reality that we were living in was that everything was urgent all the time. We were forced to live at a pace that was purely and wholly unsustainable for us. And the reality of the pandemic was that it taught us to live at a pace that we are not made to endure and that we cannot endure, that we can't sustain, and we're paying the price for it today. We still operate as organizations and in businesses and at schools as though everything has to be delivered in a moment's notice. That when I ask for something, it needs to be there now. And this is taking a toll on the people that we love, people that we live with, that we serve beside, that we sit alongside. Because the reality is that if there are 50 people in this room right now, that statistically speaking, that means that of the people sitting beside you, behind you, and in front of you, somebody is feeling anxious and overridden by the desires of the world to answer some kind of demand that they cannot meet right now. The reality of this moment is that it is steeped in anything and everything except patience. We do not live in a patient planet. So what do I mean when I say patience? I played with a couple different definitions and looked at some tried to understand what do we mean when we talk about patience. And this is the definition that I came up with. Patience is the conscious abdication of control. Let me explain what I mean by that. Patience is not just the willingness to endure and to keep enduring and suffering through the stuff that life piles on top of you. I mean, I've always thought it was weird that this phrase that we see it in James this morning, that somebody has the patience of Job. Because when you look at the story of Job, as James references, Job is a character in the Hebrew Bible who is revered as one of the holiest and most upstanding citizens on the planet. And one day, we're told in the prologue of the story that the devil comes to God and says, "You know what? I think Job is tricking us all. I think he's pulling one over on us. I think that Job is actually just like everybody else, and as soon as you stop giving him all the good stuff in life, that he's going to spit on your name and that he's going to do exactly what everybody else is doing and live exactly the way everybody else is living." And so God says, "Okay, devil, okay, Satan, Hasatan in Hebrew, I'll take that bet. Go and have your way with Job." And so over and over again, Job's family is taken from him. Job's livelihood is taken from him. His health is taken from him. Over and over again, the worst things in life are heaped on Job's back. And through it all, Job holds to this rigid idea that God knows best. When I read the story of Job, I don't see a person dealing with patience. I see a person who understands that his life is not actually lived by him. That Job's life is lived for a greater purpose. And there are all kinds of questions that the book of Job brings up, and maybe those are questions for another time, but the reality of the patience that James identifies with Job, the steadfastness that James identifies with Job, is a willing abdication of control over every part of his life. James tells us that Job lives with a steadfastness that looks to the future and says, this is not something I have control over, and so I can let it go. I can let it go even when the worst is happening around me and the worst is happening to me. I can find the freedom, the strength, the conviction, the steadfastness, the patience to let it go, to cede control of this area of my life to one who I trust knows better than me. The reality of the world, though, is in a world that has moved beyond God, there is no one else to have control. The reality of us of living in a secular world, in a secular age, in this secular society, is that, is it any wonder that anxiety has risen, that anxiety has spiked, that we live at an unsustainable pace? Because the only thing that the world can give us is you have to be in control of your destiny, your circumstances, your situation. You have ultimate responsibility for you and your soul and how you are the way you are. As we've said before, the world simply cannot give you what it does not have. And the world has nothing in it except for this moment. And so this moment becomes elevated to infinity. This moment becomes elevated to a level that it was never designed for. This moment is all that exists in a secular world. And so is it any wonder that the world is running at a pace it can't sustain? The church has, for its entirety, built systems of ebb and flow into the life of faith. There are release valves built into our calendar, built into our practice of faithfulness. Chances to simply rest and relax, to stop worrying about this moment and look forward into the future, which is where James directs our attention. He directs our attention forward and says, remember, wherever you are reading this, whenever you are reading this, the Lord is at hand. The reality of the call of patience is a belief that in what's called the imminence of Jesus. We, as a society, we're okay with the idea of the transcendence of Jesus. This idea that God exists in sort of an alternate dimension almost. God exists, he's out there, he's there to hear our prayers and act on our behalf. This idea of a God who isn't intimately involved but is out there, and when we die, we go to be with God. But for the early church, for the people that James was writing to, that James was considering, the idea of God out there wasn't necessarily where their focus was. I mean, God was out there. It wasn't an either-or situation, but God was here and now. God had walked where we walked. God had been where we were. They could point at the tomb where Jesus' body had been buried and say, he's not there anymore, but he was. They saw the imminence of God as essential, and so they saw the return of God as part of that same story. The imminence of God was part of understanding who Jesus was and what it meant to be a faithful follower of Jesus. That when he said he was coming back, that he meant it. And when he said he was coming back soon, he meant that too. And so the people of God looked to the future and they said, in this moment, in this time, in this place, that will be where the decision has to be made. At that time, in that moment, in that space, it will be okay for me to say yes then, but I don't have to put all my pressure on this moment, because there is a time coming where all of the struggle, where all of the trial, where all of the hurt, where all of the pain, where all of that comes to a head. That time exists in the future, and for us living in a secular world, we've taken all of the future and we've put it on the present. And Jesus is simply saying, let go of the future. Do not let the future bully the present. And so what does James tell us to do? If the future feels like it's bullying the present, James tells us to look at the farmers. Or as we might translate it today, plant a garden. There is nothing in this world that is a better practice of real world patience than the act of gardening. It is wonderful for some people. Trying to choose my words very carefully here because I know we have some green thumbs. It is tedium for others, but the reward is always the same. Going out to your garden and picking that ripe red tomato is worth it every single time. The reality of planting a garden is that you are trusting that you do not have control over it. You are abdicating control of that tiny part of your life to something other than yourself. You are saying, I can put the seed in the ground. I can make the conditions as best as I can. I can water it the right amount. I can understand all the horticultural science that goes into gardening. I can find the best advice I can find and follow the best practices I know of. But there is nothing in this world you can do to make that seed grow. It will or it won't, and that is not up to you. And so the simple act of planting a garden is a reminder that we are led into a spirit of patience and led into a spirit of imminence, where we understand that the future is coming and it is not now. And so we can plant a garden, not just physically, but we can plant a garden with the thoughts and with the instincts that we have when the future feels like it's bullying our present. When it feels like it's pushing this opportunity to simply be in the moment, to be present for the people we love, to be present for the people around us, to be present for the people that God has placed into our presence. We can plant a garden. We can take the thoughts and the anxiety and the hurt and the pain of the future and all the things that we're worried about happening that haven't happened yet. We can take them and we can do what the Apostle Paul writes to the church. He says, bury those things with Christ in his grave and let new life germinate out of them. Let patience bloom in your garden. Let patience blossom in your world. Let patience find fruit that you can pluck, that you can pick, that you can go and make wonderful new life with. The reality of learning how to plant a garden with every anxious thought is a call and a challenge, a reminder, and an opportunity to live into a life of patience, where we find resurrection, hope, and life for all time. Jesus is coming, and he is coming soon, whether that is in 2,000 more years or in 20,000 more years. Living into the imminence of Jesus is living into the patience of the Spirit. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.